Let's walk over here and I'll give you a little more inside information on what we're doing. The first type of training that Julian was doing, we're using a new machine called a skill mill. It's basically a non-motorized treadmill. The difference is that it has resistance, so you have 10 different levels of resistance, and of course you've got different bars for different angles, and then of course there's a computer here that's attached to a cloud where we can collect the actual data in terms of power output, miles per hour, etc. The first set was normoxic, meaning he was breathing 20.9% oxygen, which is normal at sea level. He does 5 repetitions where they ramp up for 9 seconds, and then all-out sprint, 100% exertion, for 6 seconds. Then he jumps off, and of course he's still breathing normal oxygen then, for 45 seconds, and then he does 5 repetitions. That's the first set. So he does normoxic training on a non-motorized treadmill for 5 repetitions. Then he comes over here to this chamber here that's a hyperoxic chamber, and the reason that we have this Airdyne bike in here is because the best type of recovery is what they call active recovery. Now, let's say over there that his heart rate goes up to 180. What you want to do is calculate about 60% of that, which is at about 110, because you are pumping more blood, and of course we've got 9 machines over here that are attached to this chamber, and we're pumping about 50% oxygen, so this is 2.5 times higher than what we have at sea level. So he stays in here for 5 minutes. We use the arms and the legs, and we have his heart rate. He puts an oximeter on like this, which measures blood oxygen saturation as well as his heart rate. So he comes to a level where his heart rate comes up to 60% of 1 rep max over here, or about 110. So he stays here for 5 minutes. Then we go back. It's a shuttle system. We go from over there back to over here. Only this time we hook him up to a mask and we put him on this, and we use 2 of these hypoxicators here set on low oxygen. So what he was doing was about 14% oxygen, which is a simulated 10,000 feet elevation. So we're basically doing hypoxic or low oxygen, and of course we measured over here on this O2 monitor, which is at about 14%, which is about a simulated 10,000 foot elevation. Once again, he does 5 repetitions, ramp up 9 seconds, 6 seconds of all-out exertion, jump off 45 seconds between each one of those repetitions. Then he goes back over here again for the second recovery interval, and another 5 minutes in there breathing the 50% oxygen, which, you know, it crosses the blood-brain barrier, it energizes, it helps to remove lactic acid, ammonia, carbon dioxide, these metabolic waste byproducts that build up during training. Then after 5 minutes of the second active recovery set, he shuttles back over here again. In the meantime, Mike Basil, who was the technical expert here that actually does this at SNAC, and of course you have this reserve bag here too, which everything's down now, but he switches over from the 2 machines now to all 6 machines, except for they're now pumping 50% oxygen. So the difference would be, imagine running against the wind, a strong wind, right, that second set. The third set, it's like a tailwind. You put it behind you. So what happens is, when he does this next set, the final set, the third set here, in this, what some have called altitude contrast training, we call it oxygen modulation training, because we're using normal, then low, and this third set is hyperoxygen, so we're hypoxia. So we're up to 50%. His power output is about 10% greater. His speed is 10% faster in miles per hour, and his speed endurance, in other words, the research shows the time to exhaustion is 50% longer. So where he would normally in 15 repetitions, his output, power output and speed would drop, it significantly increases. And in fact, when you were filming this, his final 2, the 14th and 15th rep of this set, where his greatest power output and highest miles per hour. It's training the central nervous system, and it's training what they call the neuromuscular firing system, so that he's actually stronger and faster after this whole process at the end of the 15 reps than he was the first rep. Because once again, it's the equivalent of putting the wind behind him, so of course it's easier to run with a tailwind than it is a headwind. So he does that, and then we also move this rack around here over to the heavy bag, and of course this is separated by 1 day, but we do the same thing with the altitude contrast or oxygen modulation. So he does 4 rounds, hitting the heavy bag, 3 minutes of low oxygen, meaning simulated 10,000 foot elevation or 14% oxygen. And then between each round there's a 1 minute recovery period. Then he goes back over there to shuttle back into the hyperoxic chamber where he's actively recovering. And the reason you need the exercise is the stroke volume of your heart, more blood is being pushed out with every single rep. So he's there for 5 minutes. You know, they call it supplemental oxygen or super oxygenation for 5 minutes there. Then he comes back and does another 4 rounds. And this time he's breathing 50%. We switch the machine over. He's breathing 50% oxygen, which means, and we're measuring with the sensors that we talked about, the velocity, the speed and power of the punches. So he does, this is once again, his speed and power, punching power, is increased by about 10%. And of course, as these rounds go on, he's throwing harder and faster punches because once again, the effect is like having a tailwind as opposed to a headwind. So the first set, it's more difficult because he's got low oxygen, and it's more difficult and your power goes down. Of course, this does other things hormonally, like increases the production of growth hormone and testosterone because it's harder and it's fatiguing the slow twitch muscle fiber and activating type 2B fast twitch muscle fiber, which is where lactic acid develops. So it's harder. It's like running uphill or punching uphill, and then do the active recovery to flush all these metabolic waste byproducts, lactic acid and others out. Then he comes back, and now he's got more punching power. So imagine this is up into the 7th and 8th round, where typically you would be throwing punches that were not as hard or not as fast, and now because of the supplemental oxygen, he's able to throw harder and faster punches. So we're training the brain and the neuromuscular firing system, the central nervous system, as well as the neuromuscular system, to throw harder and faster punches when he's fatigued or in the later rounds of a fight. That's the idea. That's what we're trying to do here with the what we call oxygen modulation training at the SNAC facility here.